The Bobs.
The Bobs, some 12-inch action here. This was on Safety Net. It was a second release after the Essentials. And this was a band that both Jim Johnson and Bill Ashton liked a lot, so they decided let's make that the second release on Safety Net. The Bob's so named because most of the guys in the band were named Bob. Although Kevin McIver was in there as well, and he stuck out. But we had Bob Roop,
Yeah.
and we had Bobby Tech.
And Kevin McIver.
If you look at where this band came from, I guess you could say the Rollin' Pins,
Okay.
adding Bobby Tech,
Right.
who had been in the Cichlids, of course.
I like the Bobs. They were good.
Yeah, and this was the second release, and this came out a little bit later. This was 1984, and at this point, John Galway was playing drums.
Okay.
And they also had Walter Salas Humara on here, and Walter and John were later in the Silos together. Bob Roop as well, in fact. So
Yeah.
this album is kind of the derivation of where the Silos came from, if you really want to look at it that way. Bob Lose also plays pedal steel on here.
Cool.
Bob Lose later played with Rooster Head and a bunch of other guys,
Okay.
and is known for his studio, The Chant.
Okay.
I don't think I ever finished the story on these guys, but Walter came out of the Essentials. Jim Johnson had done some fill-in work for Charlie Pickett and the Eggs,
All right.
and was also, I believe, in the DT Martyrs for a time. But Jim was basically best known as being a writer and photographer for Rag. So if
Okay.
you saw an article on a punk band in Rag, it was probably Jim who did it.
Okay.
Walter was probably best known for the artwork that he did for bands, flyers that he designed, and also being in the studio for Radio Free Living Room all the time. So with Rich DeFinis on guitar and Todd Barry, who's now a famous comedian, on drums,
All right.
this was their, Three Sheets to the Wind was their first album. And I love these guys because they were influenced by early REM, and they did it right. A lot of bands who were influenced by REM were too derivative and just didn't really get it. But I think they did get it. And one of the songs they cover on here is Little Black Egg, which was originally done by the Nightcrawlers from
Right.
Daytona Beach.
Yeah.
And it was a top 10 song in Miami in 1965. So it was very cool that they covered that. And these guys, especially Jim, have a sense of South Florida history.
Uh-huh.
Jim would be a great guy. He's in Atlanta, but he'd be
Yeah.
a great guy to sit down and talk to because he was in the middle of everything. Especially
I-
writing for Rag. He's got pictures. He's got pictures
Yeah.
of Debbie from the Cichlids,
Yeah.
videos, just all kinds of good stuff.
The
Speaking of the Cichlids, this was the album
Yes.
on the most unlikely label you can imagine, Bold, which was distributed by TK, the disco label. TK went out of business shortly after, and that kind of meant the album was dead, even though it got a great write-up in Billboard. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
And was named on one list as a top 10 album of the year. And this includes a lot of songs that they used to perform live, including These Boots Are Made for Walkin', and a lot of their originals. Some of the covers on here, Ups and Downs, which was a Paul Revere and the Raiders song, 14 or Fight, which was Max Frost and the Troopers from the movie Wild in the Streets.
Right. Right. I remember that. Yeah.
I remember them doing all kinds of things live.
Yeah.
Even Bay City Rollers songs. And I didn't like the Rollers. I thought they were a piece of shit. But when the Cichlids did it, it was fun.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, there are bands that took themselves seriously, and there are bands that were all about fun. And when you look at the Cichlids, if you don't look at it from that point of view, that they were having fun, people may not get it. And a lot of people don't get them today because they can't see them live. All they can do is listen to the record and say, well, they're derivative. Well, who isn't?
Yeah.
Critical Mass, this was the MCA album. This was supposed to be their big breakthrough, but it didn't do anything. And amazingly, MCA never put out a 45 from the album. Now, if they would have put Runaway out as a single, or 1964 as a single, or You Don't Mean That Much to Me as a single, these guys might have broken.
Yeah.
But I think part of what happened too is Lee Abrams, who was a radio consultant, was in their corner and very much a part of the Mass team. And there was some backlash, I think, as well, especially from stations that he didn't consult. So I think that hurt Critical Mass as well. But I know that there was some high hopes for this album, and they actually sent them to London to record this in 1980.
Was it Chris
Actually,
Squire?
1979 they started it and finished in 1980. Yeah, Chris Squire's studio, I believe. And it was a good album in the power pop vein, But if you're looking for punk rock, this is not the place to look. It's more of a power pop album.
All right.
Starting to become a rock and roll band, but more power pop still, and very different from the Silver Screen 45. But I still think Silver Screen was the best thing they ever cut.
Okay.
Einstein.